What I'd like to do today is give you a little bit of background about Giki, but I promise that'll be super short. Then I thought we could have a little bit of interaction with this survey tool. Then I'm going to talk you through some ideas and providing some sort of thinking and tips around what we can all do in terms of understanding and reducing our environmental impacts, and then we can have a little bit more interaction at the end. And please do fire in any questions. We'll keep an eye on the questions coming in, or just I don't know if you can raise your hand on here, but yeah, if you just tap anything in, if you have queries along the way, then we can stop and cover them. And I think, yeah, the more interactive, the better. So I set up Giki with my husband, James, a few years ago, and Giki stands for Get Informed, Know Your Impact. And we set it up really to help individuals and communities reduce their environmental impacts and live more sustainably. So that's really what sits at the heart of everything we do. And we have an app called Giki Badges, which is free and rates UK supermarket products on how sustainable and healthy and ethical they are. So you just scan the barcode and you see how a product performs against lots of different areas, such as low carbon footprint, palm oil, responsible sourcing. And then we said, look at things like nutrition and chemicals of concern, and then ethical issues such as animal welfare, animal testing, and suggest alternatives as well. So yeah, if you're bored at home during the sort of remnants of lockdown, scan around your cupboards, or get your kids to do it as well. I have to say, my kids are it's quite a good way to keep them busy for a bit at home, and quite educational for them as well. But that wasn't so much what I wanted to talk about today. Today I wanted to talk about what we can do more broadly in terms of our behaviour and our decisions and the choices that we make to lighten our footprint on the planet and to live more sustainably. So I wanted to findings from some very recent research that we did, asking about 2,000 UK adults, how they'd experienced their relationship with the environment during lockdown. So 53% say that seeing a positive effect of the positive environmental effects of lockdown had actually made them more committed to making changes within their own life. So that's very much aligned with some of what we were talking about earlier. And 41% have actually said that although they want to make those changes, they do need a lot more information in terms of how to do them and what changes are the most meaningful. And that really sits at the heart of what we're currently really heavily focused on at Giki. So we launched Giki Zero, which is a brand new website and web app. So it works on your phone, it works on tablets, etc., as well as a laptop or computer. And our aim is to help everybody understand and lighten their footprint on the planet. And that is what I wanted to talk about today. But first, this graph shows just how much we need to do in terms of changing our lifestyles and making real changes to the way that the world operates at the moment. So it shows how carbon emissions have gone up really since the Industrial Revolution, and that green spot today is obviously where we are now. And by 2030, we need to reduce by about 80% to get towards net zero by 2050. So there's obviously, it's going to be a massive effort from a policy perspective in terms of what businesses are doing, but there's also a load of things that we can do as individuals and within our communities, and that's what we wanted. That's really what we're focused on. So I wanted to start with Scarlett, who is in her 20s. She was one of our very early testers, and I wanted to talk about Scarlett because although she was very interested in the environment, she hadn't necessarily taken a lot of steps within her own life, firstly to understand it, and secondly to think about what changes she could make. And as she started to do that, she discovered that not only was she able to reduce her carbon footprint quite significantly, so just in a fairly short space of time, she sliced a ton off it, which is the average UK footprint is about 9 tons. So that was actually a pretty good reduction in a fairly short space of time. But also, she actually saved money, and she also found that she actually enjoyed some of the changes that she'd made as well. She found them quite life enhancing. And I think that's something that is often overlooked, that actually a more sustainable life can actually often be much more enjoyable as well. And there are certainly some changes that we all make that we feel pretty good about afterwards. So I wanted to use the way that we've structured Giki Zero to explain what the kind of areas are that it's most important to think about. And the very first thing that is really helpful in living more sustainably is to understand our impact. And within our lifestyle, there are a number of different areas where we have an impact, but we look at everything that is within our direct control, and what we eat is a good area to start with. And if we look at what we eat, it makes up very roughly a quarter of our total carbon footprint. And it also requires often a lot of water usage. So a lot of the water that we use as individuals actually goes into growing of our food, rather than, you know, having a shower or bath or whatever else it might be. And also land use as well. And land use is much greater if we eat quite a lot of meat, because the additional land is needed to grow the food to feed the animals. So an area a stat which is quite striking is that if you compare a regular diet to a vegan diet has less than half the carbon footprint of a regular diet. So clearly veganism is not for everybody, but there are lots of little changes that we can make in our diet that can make, you know, incrementally quite a difference. And I think what's really important is to understand our impacts, and then we can find, well, actually, I'm happy to make a particular change in one area, but actually in another area that's just not going to work for me. And it's when we understand the impacts that it's actually much easier to make those decisions. And it's also important to look at the whole family, and our pets are obviously part of the family. So we look at what the footprint is as well of our pets, and it's really fascinating to think of it in those terms and understand it in terms of, you know, they're another part of the family and enjoying food just as we do. Another key area is travel. So this encompasses anything from our daily commute, you know, school drop-offs, cars, tubes, trains, but also travel for holidays as well. And this can be quite a surprising area to look at, and it's definitely worth looking at this in quite a lot of detail, because there's lots of scope for changes here and lots of scope for reductions as well. So this is just one example. If foreign travel resumes as it once was, if, for example, you decide you're going on holiday to Paris, deciding whether you're going to take the train or the plane can make quite a significant difference. So the plane on this particular journey would produce about 5 times as much carbon as the same train journey. And from what we think it's really important to do is just to understand the implications of every decision that we make, because so often it's so difficult to do that, and it's really hard to know or even frame things in that sense. You know, we're so often encouraged to think in terms of price or ease or speed, and actually thinking of things in a different way can help make our decisions easier to make. Home is another crucial area to look at. So these are some of the areas within our home, our key areas really. And electricity in particular is an area that is a really good one to look at, and a really easy one to change in terms of our carbon footprint. These are purchases, so everything that we buy effectively, which, sorry, that seems to be looking a little bit odd on this screen. But we do obviously buy a lot of things, and I think understanding what the impacts are of everything that we buy really again helps inform our decisions. And I think there are 2 key elements to think about here. It's what we buy. So, you know, within furniture, for example, do we make sure that any wood in furniture is FSC certified, for example? But it's also, more importantly, actually how much we buy. And I wanted to illustrate that with this graph around clothing. So in the UK, we buy an average of around, well, over 30 pieces of clothing or footwear every year. And if we reduced that to, I'm just going to move this in case this is getting in the way of your viewing. If we reduce that to just 10, this purple bar here, you'd see how much of a reduction in terms of carbon that would make, and also obviously water use as well. And there's been a lot in the media in the last few years about the impacts of chemicals and pesticides in cotton farms, which have a broader environmental impact beyond just carbon. And reducing the amount of clothes that we buy is obviously going to have a significant difference in terms of reducing our impact in that area. But also buying secondhand, which is increasingly popular. Vintage has definitely had a real renaissance, and among a lot of the younger generations that we work with. Some of them say, well, I never buy new. I always would just buy vintage or secondhand, or, you know, and there's so many websites now where you can buy secondhand. It's definitely become quite cool in a way that maybe it hasn't always been. So that's a good area to think about. This is not, there we go. And then what we buy, but not tangible goods, but more services. So for example, if we think about going on holiday, we looked at the carbon footprint of staying in a 5-star hotel compared to staying in a campsite. And of course, it's kind of obvious when you ask the question, well, obviously a 5-star hotel would probably have a bigger carbon footprint than a campsite, but we were amazed that it was actually 18 times bigger. And really the main reason for that is the huge amount of resources that are required to keep all the services going in a very luxurious hotel, which obviously you're not going to be needing to provide in a campsite. And so when you look at those kind of differences, before you even get into the price difference, it just gives you the kind of information that can then maybe help frame decisions in a totally different way. The last area that I think is worth mentioning is our view is that changing our behavior and effectively changing the way that we make decisions and creating new ways of doing things, which can often be life enhancing, often save money, often be better for our well-being as well, are really crucial, and that is definitely the most important thing to do. But there's also a really important role for giving back effectively, and there's a huge amount of scientific and academic research about the power of trees. You know, they are one of the most effective carbon absorbing technologies that exist, and both tree planting, for which there are more and more programs around that, and also the conservation of, you know, rainforests and more broadly woodlands, you know, across the globe, is an area that it's much easier to get involved in than it used to be. We use an organisation called Tree Sisters, which is a charity which is also interested in supporting women as well, and also the World Land Trust, which does a lot of really good work around rainforest conservation. So that can be a good way to help reduce your impact by supporting other areas. So that is the first key area, is understanding what our impacts are and where the biggest areas of impact are. And it's a very useful exercise in terms of seeing where you can have the biggest wins. The second key and equally important area is, well, what can I actually do about it? You know, what steps can I take and embed into my lifestyle that are going to work for me on a, you know, reasonably long-term period, that I can, you know, embrace and continue and enjoy, and how can I understand what their impact actually is? So in Giki Zero, we've suggested over 100 steps that people can take, and rated them in terms of ease, so from easy peasy to hardcore, and in terms of impact on the planet. Because I think what's really important, and one of the challenges for many of us, is understanding how material any particular change is actually going to be. And there's been a huge amount in the press around plastic bags and plastic straws and that kind of thing. And it's really great that there's been a real change there. But it's important also that we understand the areas of our lifestyle where we can have the biggest impact. And that's what we outline in these steps. And then you can choose them and find tips and suggestions on how to achieve them as easily as possible. And it might well be that some are not going to work within your lifestyle, and that's totally normal and totally fine. If you live in the middle of the country where there's no transportation infrastructure, you're going to need a car. There's no way around that really at the moment. But there probably are other changes that you might find actually, yeah, that's going to be a good one, and that's something that I really want to work on. So what we've done to get things started is put together a few fairly straightforward steps to start with, which can be fairly easy to try out and think about starting. Well, you could start one today. So the first one's around a shower. So in the UK, we take about 7.5 minutes in the shower on average. But if you reduce that to 5 minutes, then that's going to help reduce your energy usage and heating the water. Obviously, energy bills will reduce a bit as well, and water usage, and yeah, another good one as well. So Scarlett, in fact, it was, who we talked about earlier, she came up with this idea of playing a song, one of her favorite songs in the shower. So she played that. When it was finished, it's like, okay, it's time to get out. So that can be a good way to think about it. Thames Water also do these little what are they called, like egg timers that you can stick on the inside of the shower, so you can see when you're up there. They're a 4-minute one actually. The next one is making sure that you recycle absolutely everything. So in the UK, we're pretty good at recycling to an extent, but there are lots of things that find their way into landfill that could actually be recycled. So that's another good one. Thinking about the insides of toilet rolls or plastic bottles in the shower, or the bits of sandwich wrappers that actually are recyclable. Next up is 0 miles. So we're such a car culture really across the whole of the Western world that often we drive when actually we could walk or bike. And just committing to yourself that any short journeys are going to be on foot or on a bike rather than in a car can be a really good way to reduce miles, reduce petrol usage or diesel, and also good for your health. So that's a good one. Style offs. This is around fashion. As we talked about earlier, there is a huge amount of money and the world's resources used in creating clothing that a lot of which does sit in the back of our cupboards and is rarely used. So deciding either to stop buying new clothes or looking in the back of the cupboard and recycling stuff that actually we haven't worn for ages, but we find is quite nice after all, can be an excellent way to reduce our impact, but also to save money as well. And then veggie lunch is another good one, or another alternative to that is actually committing to eating animal products just once a day. So, instead of having butter on your toast in the morning and, I don't know, cup of coffee at mid-morning with milk in, just changing those things around and just focusing on having more vegetable-based products, food, and a bit less meat and dairy, but without doing anything too dramatic. Those can be changes that can be pretty effective as well. So there's some good starter ideas, and then I just wanted to talk through a few of the bigger wins that, if you want to do something more dramatic more quickly, can be some good ones to think about. And then I wanted to go back to our little Menti survey and see if any of those have tempted you to start with, or indeed any others. And we can see if we can post any of them up. Red meat is, according to all of the academic and scientific research, an area, really one of the highest carbon impact areas of what we eat. So reducing red meat consumption can make a massive difference to our carbon footprint. The mainly plants bar, the purple one, that means not only obviously not eating red meat, but not eating meat more generally, and fish, etc. Again, not for everybody, but that can slice another decent chunk off your footprint. And then the other two are non-food related, but green electricity is one that is getting increasing traction and interest because it's not any more expensive than a regular provider who uses gas or coal to generate electricity. So there are more and more providers who are renewable energy providers, and it's increasingly easy to switch. So that can actually slice about 90% of your electricity footprint without costing you any more. So that's definitely a really good one to get on with. Divest is more complicated and can be a bit more time consuming, but particularly if you have, if you're older and you have quite a lot of pension savings, or if you have ISAs, or even a bank account, every element of any savings that we have is usually invested to an extent in fossil fuel companies. So very, very roughly, around £2 of every £100 that you might be saving with a regular high street bank is likely to be invested in fossil fuel companies. So changing that again can be a really good way to make a big dent in your broader footprint. So what I wanted to do now was go back to our sorry, there's a bit of his foot's hiding the last bit of the question, but if there are any new steps that you're up for trying as a result of what we've discussed today, or indeed as a result of any other conversations you've had. So what I wanted to do was get back to the Menti survey. So if you go back to that www.menti.com and put in the code 992286, if you're not, I don't know if it would have thrown you out actually, but hopefully it hasn't. And then we'll just get on to that last question. Doesn't seem to be. Well, in that case, apologies that that's not working, but